I've been able to like moderate a few panels at book events where then I've like met authors, and like it's really cool as an experience that I've like read their work. Like I read two women's memoirs, and then I was invited to host this panel event at this literature festival in the Bay Area. And they were like, you can invite someone if you want to speak to them. And I was like, I love both these memoirs. Maybe they'll come and talk to me. And I reached out and they were like, yeah. And they like literally flew from LA and New York. And I was like, this is kind of crazy cool that like I read their books, I loved their stories, and then they agreed to just come and have a conversation with me in person.
Hi everyone, welcome to the pod. Today we're joined by Shruti, who's a co-creator of Brown Girl Bookshelf, a platform to share books by South Asian writers with over 30,000 followers on Instagram. She's had a really awesome journey doing this with her co-creator, Mishika. In her day job, Shruti is an operations director at Carrot Fertility. But today we're going to focus specifically on the Brown Girl Bookshelf side of her life. And maybe we can have you on another time to discuss Carrot too. But today we really wanted to talk about this journey she's had with BGB. So Shruti, welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, I mean, we started talking about this a few weeks ago, or maybe a couple months ago, where I knew that you were doing Brown Girl Bookshelf, but I hadn't looked at it in a while, just because I had deleted Instagram for a period of time. But then when I got back on and I went to BGB, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many followers here. There's so much activity here. People are like so engaged in this community. So really just wanted to talk to you about that. And maybe we could start things off with just a bit of an origin story. Like, how did you decide to do this? How did you and Mishika kind of come together on this idea? And maybe just walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, first I'll plug also, in case you're ever off Instagram again, we have a newsletter, which is the other thing that I'm quite proud of Brown Girl Bookshelf, that
Awesome.
has now about 2,500 subscribers to our newsletter. So we send that out monthly, and it's a nicer, like longer form platform, also not as subject to like Instagram algorithm changes and things. And so the origin story though of how any of this started, it was really quite random. So Mishika and I know each other from college, and in college too, we used to talk about the books we were reading, and just like was a thing that we connected on. And she we didn't live near each other after college, so we would just have phone calls to catch up. And then during the pandemic, when we were catching up, there was we launched officially Brown Girl Bookshelf in August 2020. We started talking about it sometime probably in end of May or June of that year. And so when we started, right, like June 2020, still like peak pandemic, everyone's at home. We had like nothing to catch up on essentially. And so we spent most of the time talking about books. The other major thing happening at that time was the Black Lives Matter movement. So we were talking about kind of like how we were just kind of having conversations about like our thoughts on it and our reflections in that time. And then in the conversation of books, we were like, we really only read like mostly like authors, like white authors. We don't read a lot of authors of color. How do we even find those books? And then we were like, we kind of only read the top, like the books that are most popular. I'm sure there's like so many more out there. So first we were like, maybe with each other, we'll just kind of like challenge each other to go find other kinds of books and share those back. We did that a little bit, and then thought that maybe we would post about it. Mishika is like likes photography and kind of did it as a hobby. And so I was like, you make great book pictures. I always have a ton of things to say about books, as does she. So like, maybe we'll just post about it. And we truly, I know people say things like this, but we're like, maybe our friends and family will follow it. I didn't even, I think, tell all of my friends and family. I was like, if you're interested in books, you can come follow this page. What we didn't, at least I didn't think much about or know, is like how Instagram at that time also started promoting posts like that were public with like hashtags. And so we started posting a few of those, and then we started getting like a few dozen people at a time. And I was like, random people want to follow this page? Like, how weird. I don't really, at the time, I didn't follow brands or anyone on Instagram. Like, I only followed people I knew. So I thought that was kind of like interesting. Then as we like had more people who also had book pages follow us, and I think this was new to me. I think this was happening like the influencer platform was happening on Instagram at the time. I just wasn't tapped into it. Then we started realizing there was actually a lot of people who shared like writing by Black authors, writing by like Indigenous authors. And then we were both like, we're both South Asian. We actually barely read any books. I think we had both only read like one Arundhati Roy book or like a Jhumpa Lahiri book. So we were like, we don't really read that many. And then we also were like, there's probably what, like 24 books out there by South Asian authors. Like between the two of us, we can just read all of them and then like review all of them. So that was our original plan of focusing on South Asian authors. When we started doing that, then we found way more authors and people who also approached us. First, we like grew our following, but then we had people being like, I wrote this book or I wrote this memoir. Can I send it to you? So really just kind of like evolved from there. And we were like, oh my God, there's so many there's so many South Asian authors. There's so many books. There's like hundreds of them. We were not expecting that. So then we started like, the page grew to include like our guest review community. So we have like 60 odd people who review for us, in addition to ourselves, because we just get hundreds of books now sent to us. And then we also like, they're not all of our genres or things that we would enjoy. So we try to find people who would actually like them. And then our newsletter started so that we would have a platform outside of Instagram where we could share like longer form thoughts and just develop our own community offline.
So just to rewind to the beginning of the Instagram account, like you're talking about this, you're thinking, okay, this would be interesting for us to just chat with each other about. What was the impetus to even put it on Instagram? Is that something you had done in the past? Like you had just put up, between friends, let's just talk about this publicly in a way that other people could sort of see what we're logging? Or was it the first time you had kind of used a public thing like Instagram to log something like that?
Yeah, it really was the first time I had. Mishika used to, on her stories, I remember, post like aesthetic pictures of books that she read.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I had posted like, if a book really stood out to me, I would just like write paragraphs on my stories of like, here's all the things I liked about it. Cause I just want to tell people what I think about those things. So at most, I probably used it like that. But I don't even think I would have done that for books. So I think I remember once maybe I didn't even write like the content for the book. I think I wrote something like, today I sat in this chair and read this book cover to cover. Like that was the stories that I had posted, because it's like what you share with your personal Instagrams, like I didn't share actual review thoughts. And sometimes maybe people would respond to those and be like, oh, what's it about? I've been looking for a new read. And then I shared it organically.
Like for you growing up, were you someone who was pretty into, Facebook in, I don't know, high school, college time? Like you were posting a lot of your thoughts and things like that? Or was it pretty new, novel, like to even, because I think for me, I'll just say like, if I'm in a book mindset or talking to a friend, my mental default isn't to go think about putting that into a public space. It almost scares me to be like, oh my God, let me put it in the public space. Vivek and I were talking about this when we started this pod, which is just like, oh my God, it feels so weird to like expose these conversations publicly. Yeah. And I'm just wondering if when you started it, did you feel some of that nervousness about like, this is now a public conversation, even though you kind of shouldn't feel that way, I think, in some ways, but was that there for you? Or was it like, it feels natural, like this is kind of what I grew up doing?
Oh God, I feel that still now every day. Almost. Like, I think still I'm like, it's one, because we didn't intend to kind of grow it. I do feel, and this is like just being kind of more, and when Vivek and I talked about me coming on here, like there's things that I struggle with that now too, because I think I didn't think about any of those things. To answer your question, no, I wasn't like posting on my, Facebook or anything. I think I would have posted like dumb statuses when I joined Facebook like late in high school. It was like, my cousin annoyed me today, like stuff like that.
Yes, can
it
relate
wasn't
to
like
that.
anything meaningful. Even my first Instagram post personally, I was like, I think my caption was like, "What's this? I'm new here," or something like that. And it was like a picture of my friend eating a cookie, like my senior year of high school. I like remember posting that. So then it's like, yeah, I had no concept, and I didn't have any concept of how like suddenly big and like how prominent your voice could get online. Like people have had that, I think, even, before the rise of like social media networks, but like on Reddit and Tumblr and things like that. Like I didn't have any of those experiences to really like know how quickly kind of like that can get away from you. And so what scares me now is like sometimes where it's like really like that got a bunch of attention. Like I just I'm more watchful of it. And what I struggle with is that I don't want to, I feel frustrated, like of feeling like I have to censor myself because of how things are going to be perceived online. I think there are challenges tied to like the fact that we chose an identity based platform, but like we are three-dimensional people, like we are not like out there in the world saying like being a South Asian woman is my entire identity. It's like a facet of it. It's also not my only interest. Like, and so I think like that's hard. And like even now, honestly, saying this here, I'm like, oh God, like I be saying that because this is my like public, title. Like she is Brown Girl Bookshelf. Like they stand for brown women. And that's true. But I think that there's so many different angles to that and like ways that that can show up where that just by default doesn't mean I agree with every single brown woman out there. Doesn't mean I disagree with every take that like brown women as a collective might seem to like agree with. And that is really hard, truthfully, for me to like reconcile because I like sit in my private life as like a person who can express those things and I'm not afraid to with people that I know and talk to. And I'm very afraid to online now because of that tagline.
Yeah, I that resonates with me a lot because I feel that whatever society, with the society we live in, um, we all, and especially as our parents are first generation, we're second generation here in the U.S. and more than anyone else, like our identities are pulled in many different directions, and I don't think there's any one specific like. I mean, I think like we can very much disagree on a lot of things, even if you share an identity, right, with someone. Um, and so, yeah, that resonates with me a lot because I think a lot of times, especially during like the Trump years or whatever, it's like it's hard for people to really figure out what the other side is thinking and how they're thinking about it because there's so much partisanship and there's so much like opposition to just because someone said something, it's now tinged with all this other baggage they have that's associated with them, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, to me, there's something else you said, which I think Vivek and I have talked about earlier, but it's like your opinion may also change over time, right? So putting something out in the public space almost solidifies this is my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, I actually might go learn 2 or 3 things from now by talking to people. It could even be really quick. It could be like next week, someone might ping me back and be like, hey, there's more nuance to the opinion you just shared. And it's like, for me, there's almost this worry of, is what I'm saying today going to get locked in as this is Arvin's opinion for the rest of his life? And it's like, I think if people take it that way, they take it that way. But I have to trust that I'll have enough time and ability to be like, you know what, my opinion is going to change over time. And that shouldn't, the fact that someone might take it wrong up front shouldn't silence the thoughts I have at the moment, as long as they're well intentioned and coming from a place of like positivity. And I'm not hoping that people take it the wrong way, but
Yeah.
I think that's where like I've personally felt that coming into a more vocal public platform has forced me to confront that stance in a good way for me, where that shouldn't be the thing that makes me shy away from that.
Yeah, there's this unrealistic expectation of public figures and people who are publicly like you're publicly one specific thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many other facets, but yeah, it's a cool observation.
I think it's like kind of nice. If I could do it again, or if I were to change things, like even the name Brown Girl Bookshelf, it was funny because Mishika and I would talk about in college how like we went to a school with like not that many brown people, but we were like we always were like we don't really. There's people who like we met through like the Indian student club or whatever, and we didn't meet through that, and we were always like we happened to both be Indian and our friends, but that was never actually our connection point. um and like we grew up very differently. Like I obviously like I grew up in California and the Bay, so I had a bunch of Indian friends growing up and she didn't have that experience. So it's not even that that's how we related to each other. And yet like when we formed this, it was just sort of like we saw that that was a gap. In some sense that was more probably the most like businessy decision we made here, which was like addressing a market gap as opposed to like what we actually like really felt like leaning into. That's maybe one thing I would do a little bit differently, because I think if I could, I would love to actually have like a brand identity associated with like I read things and I just learn and change my perspectives on it. Like whatever you want to call that. Maybe it won't have like as punchy of a tagline as like Brown Girl Bookshelf. those things kind of came together quickly. Like we talked about that being the niche, and then Mishka was like, "What about Brown Girl Bookshelf?" And we were like, "Oh, that kind of rolls off the tongue and is nice." So we just went with it. I think I might think a little bit more if I knew that it was going to be like this identity definer. Like, what
But
do I
then
really
you
want to
maybe
be
then
known?
you but maybe then you wouldn't have. I mean, it does resonate with people, so maybe then you wouldn't have had such a good following, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think so too. And we talk about that, and also why now I'm like, am I betraying these followers by like saying this? But this is like what I don't know. I think it's honest to who I am. It's a part of who I am. It's not the only thing that I care about reading or the thing that I care about talking about from an identity perspective. I like more what you were saying, Arvind, of like reading and learning and like changing my perspective on things. I like books that are like philosophically challenging, and I prefer to kind of like talk about that on this platform now.
So what's the thing you're coming back to, which is like, this is why I still find a lot of joy and value in being online and pushing out and growing the follower base? Like, yeah, what are you coming back to, and what are you personally getting from Brown Girl Bookshelf?
Yeah. I think like two things. One, I do really like our newsletter community for this reason, because it feels like rather than people who have just clicked follow and then like passively respond um, on social media, it's like a more thoughtfully engaged group of people. And so when we write fairly short newsletter intros, and not all of them are super deep. Like our December one was just sort of on gift giving and like how you can thoughtfully gift books. But even that got like really um resonant engagement back from people. Like, and I think that that's actually, I find like one, that group to be where people opt in when they care about it, but they like, versus on social media people almost like opt in just to be angry, and like the positives don't get as shown. That's not always true. We get a lot of nice comments and things too, but like people really go all in on social media. And it's because there's
Mm.
also this like public rallying cry around it, you know? Like we had people during that time like post stories being like, cancel Brown Girl Bookshelf, unfollow Brown Girl Bookshelf. And so then there was more people coming to our page because it's like you're instigating this mob against it. Like newsletter doesn't
Did
have
you
that.
did you gain or did you gain followers or lose followers from the whole ordeal, you think?
We didn't actually, we netted out about the same. Like it
Okay.
didn't really like, which is also what makes me think like it's not that we did something that most people were like, holy shit, this is really bad.
Yeah.
But you know, I think that people were like, yeah, mostly like, okay, I'm sure we lost some followers. Um, but the newsletter community I really like for that reason, where like people are like, they take the time to read this thing, they're thoughtfully engaged. And the other thing that I really like about it is like the books that I like find. Like I think I've discovered a lot of writing, and not just like books, like writing and authors. So like I've been able to like moderate a few panels at book events where then I've like met authors, and like it's really cool as an experience that I've like read their work. Like I read two women's memoirs, and then I was invited to host this panel event at this literature festival in the Bay Area. And they were like, you can invite someone if you want to speak to them. And I was like, I love both these memoirs. Maybe they'll come and talk to me. And I reached out and they were like, yeah. And they like literally flew from LA and New York. And I was like, this is kind of crazy cool that like I read their books, I loved their stories, and then they agreed to just come and have a conversation with me in person. Um,
That's awesome.
yeah, so that part has been really nice. And like the different perspectives, I don't think I would have found those books. Like they were excellent books. But it's definitely expanded my reading, my like just my general library of the kinds of things that I look for, and notice about books too.
Maybe to shift gears just a little bit, talk about sort of I don't know what you want to call it, the business aspect of things. Um, we're a budding creator cohort here, a little group here, me and Arv. Would love to learn a little bit from you on the early days of getting things started. Did you all just like plug forward with your idea of reviewing books and doing that type of thing? Like, how do you think your followership grew so well in the early days? And was there any, deep thought put into it, or were you guys just putting out what you thought was the original intent?
Yeah. No, we did start putting thought into it once we started seeing people follow like random people. We were like, how do we actually want to use this space? So a few things, and we tried and tested like a few different things. But like one was we started thinking about like the medium, I think, is really critical, which we didn't give much thought to initially. But like, for example, I have a ton of thoughts on books. Having a super long Instagram caption is like things people don't read. So then like
Yeah.
the images became important to be like, people need to first stop and want to look at your post. And the other thing is that we realized people who are looking for book recs on things like Instagram kind of wanted to do the like quickly flip through something and like, be like, yeah, maybe, or like save it and look at it later. And so the things that like really got us a lot more exposure were things like we had book lists that were like themed. Like for like Pride Month, we had like books by South Asian authors that, touch on LGBTQ plus themes. Like people, I don't know how many people actually sit and read through like all, we put together like 12 or 15 books on there. Like I don't know how many people read through that, but they like that conceptually of like, I want to, if I'm looking for this category of a thing. And so those have worked well, but mixed in with like reviews, which actually like have, substance and content around it. And then the other, I think, like from a platform, and I think this is one thing I'm noticing like changing, which truthfully, I don't know how much like we've even kept up with this, but on things like Instagram and TikTok, like quickly generating like authentically resonating with the person is like becoming more and more important, which is why people who just like talk at a TikTok video and like are putting on their makeup or something and talking about some like deep personal story in their life like ends up doing really well. Because I think it's like you feel like you're immediately talking to a person. What we, I think, are like lagging a little now is that because we don't put our face on there as much and we don't do like even book reviews, like book talk is huge. We're not really big on book talk. And I think it's because people are just like, oh my God, I want to tell you about all this book that I read. And like, these are all the characters and I'm just in love with this character. And they just come and chat at you like a friend. That I think is where social media in general is like shifting to what people want to engage with. So I think like talk platforms like this, when you think about like the media again there, like having, I think like, we talked about this at some point, Vivek, of like having just like an organic conversation. People just want to feel like you're like listening to people talk. So yeah, I think like people say authenticity. I think authenticity augmented to the platform is important.
And what you mentioned in the beginning, there's certain things that you posted and they just took off, and some things you post don't have a lot of resonance. Like, can you share some examples of things that took off? Why do you think they resonated so well?
Yeah. I think actually I can probably share like both. Like some of the things I think that didn't resonate well that we thought would, were kind of like almost now in retrospect, I can see them as like forced. So for the holidays, a lot of people release, a lot of like platforms do like book, gift guides and things. So we were like, what if we did like a creative spin on a gift guide that's like a book paired with like a brand product by a South Asian brand that like you could gift together. It was like, I think like it got us creatively interested in like what kind of a product would you match for this vibe of a book, basically. It took a lot more effort. I think that like the juice wasn't really worth the squeeze, in that like people liked one or the other. Like they liked discovering the products if they were going to gift like a skincare product, or
Mm.
they liked discovering the books. They didn't necessarily want them together, and so it didn't really make sense to like group those things. On the other hand, the things that have worked really well, which were kind of like surprising to me, were like we did so what I would think of as sort of niche. Like it's not really why I would choose a book, but we did like one post that was like books with unconventional South Asian protagonists. And we like wrote a short description of like this character, like, broke the mold of what a like middle-aged mom in most South Asian stories tend to be. And like that really hit. And what people were like, yeah, I want a story that like does that. And it's like, oh, kind of interesting, because that's not how I would go searching for a book. Like I'm now searching for a book with a character who breaks the mold. But it worked for some people. And I think like also seeing like people really came to us for book recs. Like they didn't come to us for like book product gift combinations.
How were they finding you like in those early days? Was it just that they were looking up like, hey, books? Do people just search Instagram for book recs and then they would have like a list of tags? Or was it more like people were telling their friends when they were having a conversation about books, oh, hey, like I follow this Instagram handle that you should also follow, and it was more organic?
Yeah, I've
that
heard a
way.
mix actually. I have had very few experiences like this, so not to blow this out of, not to think that this happens to me often, but like once or twice I've had people like approach me and say like, "Oh, are you I think I've seen you on Brown Girl Bookshelf," which then people are like, "Oh yeah, my friend told me." Because then I'll be like, "How did you know me?" Like I'm like curious back. I'm not like, "Oh wow, thanks." I'm like, "Who are you? How did you find me?" That's crazy. This has never happened to me before. So then they're like, "Oh yeah, my friend told me about it," and then they're like, "Oh, this girl's like really," she's a little overly eager about this. Is probably the impression I leave. But they have been when friends have told me, have told them if they like books. A lot of people share our stuff on their stories. That's a big one, I think,
Mm.
where people will just be like, or if they like the book, they will. I've seen people share it. Have been like, my favorite read from this year, like check out the review from Brown Girl Bookshelf rather than like sharing their own thing of it. And I think actually I've noticed that with books a lot. People are like, will read something and really resonate with it. And it can be such a private experience. Probably why book clubs like make a lot of sense and like get a lot of interest because people are like, this like blew my mind. And then I'm just having this private experience with it. Who do I tell? So then when they see that online, it's like, oh my God, someone else read it. And then they go and share that. So that's been a lot of that.
When
Do
did
you
you
ever?
guys? Uh,
Oh, go ahead, Viv. Go.
when did you guys go from you picking out? I mean, I'm sure now also you pick out books to read too, but you said at some point people started sending you books to read. When did that happen? Like, was it a certain number of followers, or what was the
Yeah.
impetus?
Pretty early. We had a few like either self-published or like small authors who had like presses where they didn't get a lot of marketing support, where they were really seeking support. That was initially like probably at like within the first 1,000 followers or so. We got a couple of those. Now like all of the big publishing houses will send us books and we're like on their email lists and things. So they'll usually tap us or like sometimes they invite us to like book launch events and things like that too. And so that happened more like in the 5K plus territory. It also helped that we like would tag them. And like that was the other, once we started getting their attention by like, we tagged them enough or we wrote a really good review, or they saw it was shared a bunch, and sometimes we have seen it from other people having shared our reviews and then that publisher has tagged. The other thing I realized is that people who work at those places are like, for one, obviously they have their own Instagrams, but they're really interested in books themselves. So sometimes we get people who work in publishing following us personally, and then they will advocate at work. So we've had that with like the National Book Awards this year. We partnered with them, but I think it was because the woman just followed us on her own for a while. And then there happened to be like they were looking for people to promote the book award ceremony. And she was like, "Oh, I followed this great account. We should ask them."
Do you ever think about trying to make it into like a business, like a full-time business, and really diving in completely?
Yeah, we've gotten that question a lot and we have thought about it between ourselves. I think, like, to be honest, if there is a business model to be cracked, we haven't cracked it. I'm not totally convinced that there is one either. Because, and this is like maybe part of my like tech background type business modeling coming into the picture, but like it's such a low margin business to begin with. Like even authors, except for if you're really good and you have like, if you're a public figure on your own, like they make very little money. Publishing books, and like often
Mhm.
they have to do their own self-marketing work even at the big publishers. Like sometimes they'll buy books like really really cheap as an advance, and then authors just have to like basically earn their profit by marketing it. So because of that, I think it's like hard to see where it could be like a profitable business in any way. And I think we also haven't, either because of what our community has naturally formed to be, or because we haven't angled ourselves to be these like lifestyle influencers. Like if I were to compare it to the broader like category of like influencing or content creation, like people get brand deals from like seemingly unrelated brands, like there'll be like a food person who's like getting like a dryer sheet, like Bounce is sponsoring this food person and they like find a way to like merge those two. Like I've seen those. For one, I'm always really like kind of impressed in like what connection did you possibly draw? I don't know that I can like do that with being like, yeah, like you should eat Lay's chips because I read this book. Like what, how would I get that brand deal to work? I don't really get it.
Can I Can I throw one out that I think, I've connected a lot with, I grew up listening to radio a lot and like just had this connection to certain shows. And so I would go live to some shows.
Mhm.
And there's some like interesting thing about going and listening to the recording of a show that you've listened to on the radio a lot and seeing how they do it live. And I'm thinking like when you said book clubs to me, I was thinking, oh, it'd be really interesting if I was in your book club and then I went to your event in SF and I was sitting there watching both of you review the book like
Mhm.
live with me then having read the book, and it was like you traveled around doing that and recording sort of a book club. It just felt like there'd be this organic community of people that might be interested in doing that with you.
Yeah.
That I don't know if that's like a model for a big business. It might just be a model for like a meetup kind
Yeah.
of situation, but that's definitely something that well, yeah, wow, this is interesting to go listen to people talk on a stage. Like it does feel more intimate than
Mhm.
just listening on the radio in a way that connects you
Yeah.
with those folks. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good, that specific like event example is actually really cool. I might have to.
Do you sort of feel like your Instagram community or your community, you know, with the email list and everything, do you sort of feel like it's a like a little book, not little, it's kind of a big, but it's like a book club type of thing?
No, actually, I wish I did more. I wish that we got more like like direct more avenues to directly interact about the book. Like sometimes we'll have really great DMs with people that are like, I read this book and I have all of these thoughts, and then we'll be like, oh my god, same. I've been trying to find someone, especially because now we'll get these early copies. Where like no one's gonna read this book for like 8 months at minimum, and like now I have no one to talk to about this. So like it would be nice if we could get that a little more. So yeah,
What
it
if you
doesn't feel
guys
that
did that?
way.
Like I feel like you guys could, like you get this early manuscript or whatever, early public publishing of this book, and then you have your closest group of 10 or 15 people who really are active subscribers and really love you guys, and you guys do like a little podcast, like I don't know, like do a little thing to promote it, and that could
Yeah.
be like a promotional thing you sell to publishing houses.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. Like for I think the one-offs make sense. So we've done a few one-off events that have been really good. We at one point tried to launch a book club and it tapered off so quickly. Like the first one was really successful, and I think that's pretty common unless you're like, this is my group of friends who I'm going to go eat dinner with
Yeah.
anyway and we're going to have it. So, but the one-off ones could be pretty interesting. The other thing that we have found, which also was a little bit of a surprise, to me was we just had like in New York, Mishka used to live in New York, and she did like a holiday meetup event with this like South Asian bakery that was doing a pop up. And it had a very minimal book tie to it. We did like we called it a book exchange, but everyone just brought a book and like wrapped it. And then we like did that exchange, but it mostly was just like 2 hours of people chatting and talking to each other. I think that was the first moment that it really like sunk in of like, oh, this is a community of people, like they resonate with each other. Like that is the value here, not just the books. Because up until then, it felt like people were just coming to us for recommendations. But there is like a percentage of people who are like, these are my people. Like and like there were some people, there was at least one person who was like telling us that she came from like 2 hours away. We were like, you came 2 hours away into New York City just to attend this event? Like, that's crazy. Like, this isn't,
That's cool.
yeah. And
I feel
so
like
that,
I feel like there's something there. Like there's something there where you could, you know, outside of just the, of course it's great to have the community aspect and people to feel a part of something, but there's also something, there's some like a business thing there where like,
yeah,
you know, publishers are sending you these books months in advance, and you could be like, hey, well, you're sending me this book. Like, what if we used our community to generate some organic content that shows excitement about the book, you know?
yeah,
Um,
At the
yeah.
same time, though, maybe turning it into a business really changes the way you think about the project.
Mhm.
Maybe it starts to become a little less passion projecty and a little more like, oh, this thing is now my job. Like
Yeah.
so.
well, it doesn't,
Yeah.
it's still, I mean, you're doing the same, maybe a slightly more effort, but, um, yeah. Do you feel like over time you're spending a lot more time on BGB than you were before, or?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I spend probably like every weekend at least, probably like maybe 6 hours. And then if depending on like ebbs and flows of things, like
And
this
that's
week I was,
outside of just reading.
yeah. There is a lot of operational like stuff to your point, Arvind, of like the things that we had to just sort of like keep the lights on going. Like there's so much that takes up my time in organizing that. Like we have to, I don't know, just like it's honestly like what my day job is like operational logistics of things sometimes. Like we have to email all of our guest reviewers. How do we keep track of like the inbound book requests, the outbound book requests, where those requests live between our email DMs, between our email and DMs. And so then like just the trackers that we have to build for that kind of a thing and the follow-ups that are needed. Our reviewers will send us reviews and pictures. We have to store them. And because like Mishika's in a different time zone, she lives in the UK now. So it's like it's much more even to like coordinate. It'll be like, what are all the checklist items I have to send her? So it's changed the nature of like the reading part of it is a little divorced from the operations part of it. And I would say like the operations part eats up a little bit more time as we get bigger. So there is that trade-off with like making it a business. But I like what I like about actually like some of the ideas that you had just said is that like they're fun and like different spins on things. It's like a low commitment in that I'm not like relying on this for it to be a successful business. So like it gives me the luxury of then like figuring out like, is this fun enough that it's worth the like all of the organization part of it. Like the book swap was a ticketed event, but that was like the least positive outcome of like hosting that. Wasn't the fact that we like made it ticketed, but was like we discovered this thing about what people liked about our community.
Random idea just popped into my head too. Like you probably have 100 books at this point just sitting around your house or something. What if you had like a book trunk concept where you do a subscriber giveaway essentially and send a trunk of books to someone, and then I don't know, maybe it could be like a Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants type of deal where it's like these books just end up in different places and you have people post on Instagram when they get their book or something. I don't know, there's something there.
Yeah, there's something like there's like a mystery book situation, or like I've seen ones that are like book gifts that are like a mystery date with a book, where you like wrap it and you ship those. The one that I think is actually like interesting and has a cool like growth business model with it is like these book of the month clubs, or like even like a Reese Witherspoon and like Oprah Winfrey have their book clubs, but they're like, it's like a decentralized book club concept, but like it's part of this like national brand. And so when you get like actually that would be one that would be like really sick of a like association. Like I am a brown girl, like I'm like there's like Jenna Bush, I think, has one. Reese Witherspoon has one. And people will promote, like, I'm a Reese Witherspoon pick. Like, that's a pride. That's a point of pride for authors. It's like a badge to wear. That would be awesome if people were like, I'm a Brown Girl Bookshelf pick. That would be a cool direction that I would like to see. That is
cool.
Right. Well, what you've realized is if you ever need free consultants to just think on the side, random ideas that probably won't work about your Instagram.
Come back on the pod, you know?
Yeah.
No. I was going to say, maybe this should be your guys' angle for this. Come to us and we will just iterate on cool ideas, because it does kind of get your gears turning. It's a cool angle.
Yeah. It's good.
There you go.
I like that.
Well, do you have a couple
for your podcast, and it'll be that?
I was wondering if you have a couple. I'm actually genuinely looking for a next book. Like, do you have a couple that you would recommend?
Okay, well, what kinds of books do you like? I can kind of orient around that.
Okay, let's see. Do they have to be like Indian books?
No. Like general
like
themes, like genres.
Okay. I like fairly serious books. Like what's a good recent? I'm trying to think fiction.
Or nonfiction too, if you like nonfiction.
Or nonfiction. I like Siddhartha. If you've ever read Siddhartha, that's a really interesting book. That's just more like a yearly reread for me. It's kind of short and good. Recently reread Count of Monte Cristo again. I really like that type of book. I don't know if this is giving you any ideas that you want to jump in at any time. I'm not I'm trying to think of some specific books that are like mine.
Even non-specific like book recs. Like, are you a nonfiction or a fiction book reader?
I'll skim nonfiction, and like I really like that, but I won't go as deep. It'll take me like a day or two and I'll get the concept. But nonfiction, like I'll get into and I'll read the whole thing a couple times.
Wait, fiction, you will?
Fiction. Like Shantaram, for example, like fiction, like that's a fantastic book. I love that book.
Yeah.
I've read like a kind of thing when I get a good fiction book, like I will reread it every couple of years where I'm like, I'll come back to it.
Yeah. Okay, I'm kind of the same way. And I was like, are you more of like a serious, like philosophical book reader or like a fun, like you're looking for like a reading escape kind of a book reader?
Yeah, I'm not like I'm not too into like fantasy type of
Yeah.
books.
The
Like I kind of
former,
want
the
like a little
former.
bit more of a real, yeah.
Yeah. Cause then I'm like, oh, we did this one that was like the New York Times did like a best books of the decade or something like that. And we did like our equivalent of it. And Mishika and I, this is also the disservice in some ways that we resonate on the books that we read, but we like the same kinds of books. And now we're like, there's so many other genres out there. So our guest reviewer community helps with this. But what happened for when we picked these top books, they were all kind of that ilk, I would say. So the ones that I really like are A Passage North by Anouk Arudpragasam. It's like, it's very thinky, it's very philosophical. It actually, I have the worst description of it because it has no plot and no dialogue. So it sounds actually like a bad read, but I think it's very good. It's a bit of it's like a mental challenge, I would say. Like sometimes you're just like, it's the whole concept of it is like this guy sitting on a train. He's in Sri Lanka post-war. It's like set in post-war Sri Lanka, and he has like escaped the war, and so he's dealing kind of with his like I think privileges as like a person who was able to do that. And he's on a train to northern Sri Lanka where he's going to be going to a funeral of somebody who he knew that did have impacts from the war. And the whole way he's just like waxing philosophic about like his thoughts on privilege and like impacts of war and like life purpose. It's like it's very can be very long and dreary, but has like these moments that I thought were really, really like hitters. The other one I think you might like, if you like some of the things you said, like The Covenant of Water, is a pretty popular book by
I've
Abraham
heard of that.
Hicks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge book. It's like 700 pages or something like that. But also really good.
Shantaram is long too.
Yeah, Shantaram is very
Shantaram
good.
is long, yeah.
One that's like a little funny if you're like a dry humor, sarcastic person, but also has deep thought. And
Oh,
like,
hold on. This one is one of the Oprah Book Club picks, The Covenant of
yes,
Water. It's
that is,
also a Brown Girl bookshelf pick
yes.
for the
And
win.
Needs a
matching
second
that-
sticker on there.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And The Seven Moons of Mali Almeida is the other one I would recommend.
That just won it won a major award, right? Yeah, the Booker.
Yeah,
Okay.
won
Yeah.
the Booker Prize. It's very like funky and cool. It's like sarcastic, a little like dry humor. It's like a little. It's not really fantasy, but it's like magical realism. Like the guy is talking from his afterlife, but it's also like a. It's funny because all these books will have like a 3 point something rating on Goodreads. Like Goodreads hates all of my picks I've seen, so I wouldn't look at that. But yeah, those
You know,
Sorry,
like this is
wrong
like when
book.
people are like,
Yeah.
what's a good authentic Indian or Chinese restaurant?
Yes.
The recommendation is you got to look between 3 and 4 stars. And anything
Yeah.
above 4 stars is not like the real like authentic experience.
That's all right. What's yours in the Bay? What are your Chinese and Indian recs?
Ooh. Oh man, I don't even know their names, frankly. There's like a couple that are in Milpitas that I just used to walk into after. And then they used to make these like vats of food.
If
right?
you're
And then
looking
they would-
South Indian, you've got to go to Mylapore. There's two or
that's true.
there's 2 or 3 different locations.
Yeah.
In fact, shameless plug for potential future. And if you're listening, we may try to get JJ Raman on the pod, who is he's doing Sapat as a service over at Mylapore Cloud Kitchens. But yeah, that's one that the actual restaurant is one you must try. Yeah. So one thing I'd love to get your take on, Shruti, just because you read so many books, you talk to so many authors, you obviously have so much exposure to the book industry more than any average person. How do you feel about how AI sort of plays into the book business or the book publishing business?
Yeah, I think I think there's like 2 elements to it. One is like AI doing all the writing, which is like that has a lot of, controversial, I think, like things that are complicated about that. But like I think right now we're seeing some developments with like AI in the publishing process, which I think can actually be pretty beneficial in like democratizing who gets published and how quickly books get published, and not some of the like middleman overhead typically involved in like traditional publishing routes. There's this company called Spines that just got some VC funding to do this. And I think like the interesting part is that like people have different takes on this too. Like I think there's like some degree of like fear of AI, which makes sense. Of like there's just that is a big conversation in many different like elements of like the ethics around it. But then also like should we be funding technology to promote this like the pure creativity craft. And I kind of am like actually more on the pro. I think there's a lot of pros to this kind of a business, even for people who are creatives and who want to focus on writing.
Do you feel
Yeah.
like it is taking away from people who are, or like, are people using it to write their books themselves? And if they are using it, are they doing it in a way where you think it's starting to kill part of the industry that would have been more organic? I feel this particularly when I'm looking at kids' books. Like, I'm just wondering, are kids' books, is it happening in kids' books? They feel like the language is simplistic in a way that an AI might be able to replicate a little bit more easily, I think.
Yeah, that part is true.
And illustrations. The AI is able to do some really cool illustrations and graphics nowadays. Although
Yeah.
there's some weird blurry parts and random, you can sort of tell it's made by AI. But
Yeah, I think like when you have something doing all of the writing, like I can see where there's like an ickiness around that, especially because there's lots of people who are using their brains and thinking creatively about this on their own and just not producing as fast or as cheap. But then I think like there's some elements that are like benefited by AI from like even having like an ideating partner or like trying to unblock, like lots of people get writer's block. Like if you're using AI to enhance your own writing process, I personally think that that's like a good thing, that like a lot of people who are like trying to write books or do this full time like have these like limitations because maybe they're blocked by those factors. So like having a personalized tool that's helping you through those things could be nice. From a publishing perspective, like it is a huge outdated industry in many ways. Where like in the United States, there's like a very few large publishers who own most of the market share and then have most of the control. Like as a company that's trying to make that more accessible by making it cheaper through AI, I think is like generally a good thing. But yeah, I think there's a lot of ethical like things around replacing creative work with AI. I think for children's books too, that actually kind of like a unique danger in some ways of children's books is like they're so impressionable. I just saw something on Twitter this morning of somebody whose children's book was like anti-AI and like AI was the villain, and she was like like what a like you're having the kids like think of things in that way. And there are studies that show this too, of like kids who in children's books where villains are like darker skinned, because it'll like start to subconsciously integrate in that child's mind as like who looks like villains and who are villains. So there's like a lot of impressionable things there, which then like, do we want a robot to be teaching our kids those things? Is I think
Yeah, I feel like there is a future for human made, almost the way handmade is done. It's like there's going to be almost an auditable process where someone has watched or recorded making something organically, and it's like the way that organic produce is made, we have to certify that this was made in a certain way. I just feel like there's probably a future where you're like, yeah, this was made by a human, and you're going to pay a little bit more for that, but we need to support people.
Brown Girl Bookshelf certified and made by humans. And
we become like the certified auditing.
And it's also non-GMO, not genetically modified.
Yes, all of those labels. Yeah, that's a good. I mean, that would be really fascinating. I could totally see that. Yeah, handmade to human made. Yeah,
feels kind of dystopian. Also, that I'm suggesting that.
Yeah, I mean, in this topic, I also have book recs. Actually, I read this book called "The Immortal King Rao," which is written about like a dystopian future where one corporation basically got more power than the government and becomes like the de facto government, and then all citizens become shareholders. And it's written in like the perspective of like what that looks like when you disagree with like your corporation, but that's your government.
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah. Also,
what is it called again?
The Immortal King Rao by Vahini Vara. She used to be like a tech journalist, so she has a lot of like she has another book out this year too, I think.
Yeah. But I think actually, to go back to your point, the creative work is one part of it, but I think there's a lot of potential for AI to streamline, probably, I imagine, the publishing process of what it takes from soup to nuts to go from an author writing a book to getting it out on the street. There's probably a lot of inefficiency there, right? Mm-hmm. There's probably something, I mean, like imagine the number of reviews it's got to go through. Like, did you dot all the T's and cross all the I's? Like, I don't know. There's probably a lot of these things that
This guy's dotting T's and crossing I's over here, so I don't know what's going on.
I know. Arv got me.
Vivek needs that AI grammar checking right now, spell checking right now.
No, yeah, I know. It's sort of one of those things that signals authenticity, though. Nowadays, if you see an email that has a spelling error in it, it's like, oh, that actually came from a human.
That's true.
And one of the tactics, I mean, this is more putting my sales hat on. One of the tactics that people are using in their AI-generated emails is prompting the AI to make one small error in the actual text of the email so that it looks like it's sent from a human.
Wow.
We've reached a truly dystopian future.
It is here. Look what's happening in LA, man. It's terrible. But it's a crazy time we're living in, for sure.
Yeah, it is crazy how a lot of books actually have predicted this kind of thing, and then now here we are. That part is actually a little freaky too.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of creativity. People who are creatives who are creating our future have learned from like old Isaac Asimov books and all the old science, not the things. And so, in some ways, authors who have been writing these like future dystopian or otherwise have had a hand in shaping the future because people get inspired by it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Been like thinking about the things that they're bringing up there and trying to solve for it, which then maybe trains that model to think about the exact. There's like some sort of mind warping happening here, but like, it's just like if you don't tell the model to think about the ethics of AI writing, then it doesn't even know conceptually that exists. But now those books have like triggered a need to train a model against that, where now they're like trying to evade being seen as writing like AI.
Yeah, I think that the biggest positive for creatives is that they can do things that are anomalous, right? Like there was this crazy poem that I read. It's an old one. I have to pull it up, but I'll find it somewhere. But it's like this string of words that just like makes absolutely no sense, but it's hilarious, even though it's like completely meaningless. And it's almost like only a human could have really come up with that, unless you were an algorithm to come up with something batshit crazy. But like, it's like one of those things where the humanness of humans will always remain in some way, right? Where it's like we can our fallibility is kind of a feature.
Yeah, but you can get AI to write in the style of. That one is the one that's freaky to me, because when you can like have it write in the style of a specific person, like how do you tell the difference, especially when it's written word online and someone's like, if it's a quote by Obama and it sounds like exactly the kind of thing Obama would say, how do we distinguish of like what he actually said? I think those are the moments I realize like it feels like I have a direct line of access to those people when they like post words online, but we can never really know whether it's like directly them or not.
Cool. Well, I think we've just crossed our hour here, but it's been so much fun learning from you, Shruti, and I think we'll continue the conversation. Hopefully, we can have you on again at some point in the future as well. And if there's ever anything you want to talk about, a book, idea, concept, something you're going to launch, whatever it is, we'd love to.
Starting to pitch my business. Maybe I'm just gonna.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll be your first. Pitch book equivalent. Here.
Awesome.
That would be
awesome,
cool.
awesome.
Actually, that's a cool angle. And also, like, I should say, like, I like that you guys are doing this. I listened to a bunch of your episodes before I came on here. Also, just like before even I was going to come on here, because
any that you would say are a must listen.
Oh, a must listen. I personally really liked the ARM one.
Okay.
The ARM. Oh my gosh, this is bad that I'm forgetting his name now. But
Somal Shah, Chief of Staff at ARM, was on this podcast. Everyone should go and listen, especially because it was a Brown Girl Bookshelf recommendation right here live.
Yes, which is a bit of a random one, but that for me professionally was like, cool, and lots of learnings from that I thought was awesome.
So great.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks so much for taking the time.
Great talking to you.
Yeah.